begin tonight with scandal. Good old-fashioned bribery and corruption scandal, complete with perp walks and politicians in handcuffs and envelopes of cash being passed at diners and in parked cars and secret wiretaps. Sometimes politics really is just an episode of The Sopranos, and today was one of those days. What happened today, actually, in terms of understanding the players and what they did, the easiest place to start is the 2012 election in New York State. It's kind of a weird one in New York State. You know that the governor of New York State is a Democrat and a very popular one, Andrew Cuomo. He was not on the ballot in 2012. He'd been elected 2 years earlier in 2010. Election night 2010, everything else in the country went Republican, but the New York governor's race that put Andrew Cuomo in office, that race was blue by 30 points. Then in 2012, Andrew Cuomo's not on the ballot. The only statewide races in New York were, of course, the presidential race, in which President Obama beat his opponent by 27 points. That was one of the biggest margins of any state in the country. The other statewide race in November 2012 in New York State was the Senate seat held by Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand. Senator Gillibrand beat her challenger by a 45-point margin. So yeah, the political picture in New York State was just overwhelmingly Democratic, just solidly blue in terms of the 2012 election. But New York is a big state, a largely rural state, and a more ideologically diverse state than it sometimes gets credit for, thanks to its statewide election results. One of the manifestations of New York's unheralded diversity is that even though the state is so blue it looks cold in any statewide vote, when it comes to voting for state legislators, it's not nearly like that. The Senate in New York State, the Senate has only been in Democratic control 3 times since World War II. But on the election night, November 2012, on that hugely blue night in November, where President Obama beat Mitt Romney by a 27-point margin, under the leadership of a Democratic governor with the highest approval ratings of any governor in any state in the country, on that hugely blue night in November, where Kirsten Gillibrand embarrassed her Republican opponent, on that big blue night in New York, it looked like even the impenetrable fortress of the permanently Republican-dominated state Senate was going to come crumbling down and finally become blue as well. The Democrats looked like they won the Senate in November 2012 in New York. Democrats in November won 33 seats in the Senate. Republicans won 30 seats. So that means Democrats take over the Senate, right? Wrong. Even though the Democrats won a clear majority in the Senate, a subgroup of Democrats decided to peel off and caucus themselves with the Republicans instead, so the Republicans could keep control in the Senate. It was really weird. It was very weird at the time. When it happened, even before we found out what it was leading to today, it seemed like a weird thing. The New York Times said when it all happened that it was a particular coup for the breakaway faction of Democrats when they recruited a Democrat to their side who was the former leader of the Senate Democrats. Quote, they also recruited an additional Democrat to their caucus, Malcolm A. Smith of Queens, a former leader of the Senate Democrats, who has sought support from Republicans for a possible run for mayor of New York City. The breakaway faction of Democrats and Mr. Smith talked through the arrangement over a recent lunch of fried meatballs with peppers and onions at Enzo's in the Morris Park section of the Bronx. Well, today it was not fried meatballs with peppers and onions, but it was a shared arrangement between Senator Malcolm A. Smith and the Republicans who he thought could get him on the ballot as a Republican to run for New York City mayor. See, there are a lot more Democrats than there are Republicans in New York City. So it is a tried and true method to become a Republican specifically for the purpose of running for New York City mayor. It means you don't have a difficult primary, right? You have an easier primary if you're running as a Republican than you would if you were running on the Democratic side, even if you have been a lifelong Democrat. And that's how Mike Bloomberg got the mayor's job in the first place, right? Then once he was in, he ran as a Republican. Then once he was in, he dropped the Republican label and became an independent. But if you are a registered Democrat and you want to pull this, you want to appear listed as a Republican on the ballot in a New York City election, what you need is a majority of the Republican Party bigwigs in the city to sign off on you doing this. Yeah, we know you're a Democrat, but we'll sign this waiver allowing you to run as a Republican. We know why you want to do it. Well, when that Democratic state senator was arrested today, he was arrested alongside 2 other Democrats and 3 Republicans with whom he was allegedly conspiring to bribe his way into getting that permission from New York City Republican bigwigs so he could get onto the ballot, so he could get a shortcut to the mayor's race, so he could maybe end up running America's largest city. It was the Democratic State Senator Turncoat who helped give the other party, the Republicans, control of the state Senate. And it was the chairman of the Republican Party in the Bronx and the vice chairman of the Republican Party in Queens and a Republican city councilman, and so on. 6 arrests and all the accompanying salacious details from the U.S. attorney today, who looked disgusted at what he had to explain to the public.
The complaint sets forth 3 bribery schemes involving cash payments of tens of thousands of dollars to elected officials and party leaders. Every New Yorker should be disheartened and dismayed by the sad state of affairs in this great state. From time to time, the question arises, how common is corruption in New York? I can tell you, based on the cases that we have brought and continue to bring, it seems downright pervasive. But don't take my word for it. Consider the words of City Councilman Daniel Halloran, caught on tape in this case. After allegedly receiving a $7,500 cash bribe, he says to the cooperating witness, and you can see it on the chart here again to my left, quote, "Money is what greases the wheels, good, bad, or indifferent." During that same meeting, Halloran allegedly says, quote, "That's politics. That's politics. It's all about how much. And that's our politicians in New York. They're all like that, all like that. And they get like that because of the drive that the money does for everything else. You can't do anything without the money." After the string of public corruption scandals that we continue to expose, many may understandably fear that there is no vote that is not for sale, no office without a price, and no official clean of corruption.
Money is what greases the wheels, good, bad, or indifferent. Quote from the Republican city councilman arrested today, along with 5 others. Feel dirty yet? How about the allegation that the Republican city councilman thought his big payoff for dealing with all the bribery was that he would get named New York City's deputy police commissioner? So if all the bribing worked out and his guy did succeed Mike Bloomberg as mayor, he'd get that big law enforcement job. My favorite detail from the complaint is where the vice chairman of the Republican Party in Queens apparently decided that the stuff they were talking about was so shady, it was so illegal, that he ought to take precautions. And so he decided in one of these meetings that he ought to pat down one of the guys he was talking with about the bribery details to see if the guy was wearing a wire. The guy who he was patting down was wearing a wire. He was an undercover FBI agent, and he did have a recording device on him to record those conversations, but the Republican guy missed it. He did not do the pat down well enough to find the wire, and the FBI agent just kept recording. What would have happened if he had found the wire?